The snow came sideways that morning, like the sky had decided to start over. The temperature gauge on Sophie Bennett's ancient Chevy dashboard had stopped working 2 states back, but the way her breath crystallized inside the car told her it was well below zero. -20 Fahrenheit, at least the kind of cold that turns metal brittle and hope fragile. The windshield wipers scraped desperately against ice, forming faster than they could clear it. Each pass left less visibility than before. Through the narrowing portal of clear glass, the road ahead disappeared into white oblivion. In the back seat, 9-year-old Lily slept bundled in layers of thrift store clothes and wrapped in their last blanket. A rattling cough escaped her lips, followed by a small whimper. Her cheeks burned too bright against pale skin. The fever had started yesterday, worsening through the night. Sophie glanced at the bottle of children's Tylenol, 3 doses left. The digital thermometer had died that morning, but she didn't need it to know Lily's temperature was climbing. They needed shelter, warmth, medicine. The engine sputtered, coughed, then died with a shudder that vibrated through the frame. A final surrender. Sophie pumped the gas pedal and twisted the key 3 times before accepting the inevitable. Dead. 5 miles from the nearest town, according to the last road sign, if you could trust those in a place this forgotten. Her phone had died hours ago, the car charger another casualty of the hasty departure from her previous life. In her wallet, $43.17. The sum total of what her ex-husband's lawyer had left her. 1 duffel bag of clothes, a backpack of Lily's belongings, and a half-empty grocery sack with crackers, peanut butter, and 2 bruised apples. Not enough for what might come. Sophie pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. The cold of the plastic shocked her skin, momentarily clearing the exhaustion fog. The homeless shelter in the last town had turned them away. No vacancies, not even floor space. "We're so sorry, ma'am. Tried at Greenfield, 30 miles east." But the storm had changed direction, and so had they. North, away from Paul's legal reach, toward the Canadian border and the slim possibility of her mother's second cousin in Vermont. A tendril she'd grasped at in desperation. A distant howl cut through the hiss of snow against metal. Wolves, coyotes. The sound raised the hairs on Sophie's arms. Too close for comfort. Through the frosted side window, she caught movement at the tree line, a gray shadow, patient and lean. Waiting. She locked the door as a futile gesture against the cold that was the more immediate threat. Without the engine, the temperature inside the car would match outside within hours. The small emergency kit in the trunk had a Mylar blanket and hand warmers, but nothing that could sustain them through a night like this would become. Something crackled under her elbow as she shifted. Sophie reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a faded postcard stuck between the car's manual and registration. It showed a gray stone mansion on a hill, partially hidden by pine trees, grand even in apparent abandonment. On the back, in her father's distinctive block letters, Harford Estate, 1983, the last peaceful place. Strange. Her father had never mentioned this place yet. Here was evidence he'd been there 9 years before her birth. The postmark showed Silver Ridge County, the same county they were currently stranded in. A cough from the back seat, more ragged than before. Lily's stirred eyes fluttering open. "Mom, where are we?" Her voice sounded small against the howling wind. Sophie forced a smile, the kind that conceals everything. "Just taking a break, honey." "How's your throat?" Lily winced instead of answering. The motion sent a spike of panic through Sophie's chest. 32 years old, a former Navy machinery technician with combat zone experience, reduced to helplessness by a broken-down car and a sick child. Through the windshield, past the gathering snow, a faint light winked from a distant hillside. So faint she might have imagined it a golden pinprick in the white void. Sophie squinted, wiping condensation from the inside of the glass. Not a hallucination. A light where no light should be given, the emptiness of the landscape they'd passed. Memory and intuition connected the postcard, her father's handwriting, this county. Could it be the timing too perfect to be coincidence? Sophie reached back and squeezed Lily's hand. "We have to walk. It's not safe to stay here." Lily's eyes widened with fear and exhaustion, but she nodded. The trust in that simple gesture nearly broke Sophie. Since the divorce, since everything had been taken, Lily had become smaller, somehow more cautious, but her faith in her mother remained absolute. A faith Sophie wasn't certain she deserved. They gathered what they could carry: the food, water bottle, medicine, the heaviest clothes, Sophie's Swiss Army knife, the flashlight. The cold hit like a physical blow when they opened the car door, stealing breath and burning exposed skin. The walk was agony. Snow past their ankles, wind cutting through layers, visibility reduced to feet rather than yards. Sophie carried Lily on her back when the girl's steps faltered, ignoring the screaming protest of her muscles. The light on the hill grew incrementally brighter, resolving slowly into the silhouette of a large structure. After what felt like hours, the outline of a gate emerged from the whiteness iron bars twisted into decorative patterns, half buried in snowdrifts. Beyond it, a curving driveway disappeared into snow-laden trees. And there, through the skeletal branches, stood the mansion from the postcard. 3 stories of weathered gray stone, a steep slate roof weighted with snow, dozens of windows dark except for what might have been a faint glow from one upper floor. Larger than Sophie had imagined from the picture, imposing in its silent grandeur. A mansion built by people who intended their legacy to outlive them. Hartford. The name from the postcard matched the tarnished bronze plaque on the gatepost. The gate itself hung partially open, one hinge broken, as if the property had given up on keeping secrets. The wind died momentarily as they passed through the tree line, the relative silence startling after hours of howling gales. Lily's breathing came in shallow pants against Sophie's neck. "We made it, kiddo. Just a little further." The front entrance featured massive double doors beneath a stone portico, but ice had sealed them shut. Sophie circled the perimeter, Lily leaning heavily against her side, now too exhausted for questions. At the back of the house, a smaller service entrance looked more promising, wood rather than metal, the frame showing signs of past water damage. Sophie assessed the door with practiced eyes. Navy training had included more than engine repair. She'd learned to evaluate structural integrity, to find weaknesses in seemingly solid barriers. This door's vulnerability was clear. Water had warped the lower panel, the lock mechanism was antique, and the hinges showed significant rust. She set Lily down on a relatively sheltered portion of the rear porch. "Cover your ears, honey." Sophie removed her boot, held it by the toe, and struck precisely at the junction of lock and jam. Once, twice. On the third impact, wood splintered and the door shuddered inward. The air inside was impossibly colder than outside, stale and untouched. Their entrance disturbed decades of silence, footsteps echoing through what appeared to be a service kitchen. Copper pots hung from a ceiling rack, their surfaces dulled to a sickly green patina. A massive cast-iron stove stood against one wall, its surface thick with dust. Cabinet doors hung askew on broken hinges. In the corner, a wooden chair lay tipped onto its side as if its occupant had left in a hurry long ago. They moved deeper into the house. Sophie's flashlight beam, catching snippets of faded grandeur or crown molding, carved banisters wallpaper that might once have been elegant but now peeled in long strips like birch bark. The grand staircase at the center of the main hall swept upward into darkness wide enough for 5 people to climb side by side. Sophie tested the first step, then the second. Despite creaks of protest, the structure held firm. Good craftsmanship built to last through neglect, the kind her father would have appreciated. The flashlight beam weakened, batteries failing in the cold. Sophie led them to what must have been a sitting room where heavy velvet drapes could be pulled across windows to conserve what little heat they might generate. She cleared dust from a small couch, laid out their blanket, and settled Lily with the last dose of Tylenol. "I'm going to explore a bit, find something to burn." Lily's eyes had already closed, exhaustion claiming her. Sophie tucked the blanket tighter and pressed her lips to Lily's forehead. Still too warm, but at least they had shelter now, a beginning. The search proved fruitless at first. No obvious firewood, no functioning heating system visible. The flashlight dimmed, further pressure mounting with each darkening sweep. In what appeared to be a library, Sophie's beam caught a glint of metal on the floor, a brass handle attached to a wooden panel. She pulled, meeting resistance, then threw her weight backward. The panel opened with a groan, revealing narrow steps descending into darkness. A basement. And where there was a basement in a house this old, there would be a boiler. The stairs creaked ominously underfoot, the air growing dense with the smell of mildew and old coal. At the bottom, the flashlight beam, now barely brighter than a candle, illuminated a massive shape against the far wall. A boiler, ancient and intimidating, its metal body streaked with rust, but structurally intact. Sophie approached it like a soldier might a sleeping giant. The manufacturer's plate read, Fairbanks Morse Series E200 1965. A behemoth from another era, but built with the over-engineering common to its time. Beside it, a coal chute and a half-full bin. Potential if she could make it work. Sophie's light caught another anomaly, a wooden crate partially hidden behind the boiler. She pried open the lid to find tools neatly organized and preserved in oilcloth. Pipe wrenches, screwdrivers, gauge instruments. And beneath them, a leather-bound manual with the boiler's exact model number printed in gold leaf. The coincidence seemed impossible, yet there it was, a toolkit prepared for precisely this machine, hidden as if waiting for discovery. Sophie ran her fingers over the embossed cover, something like hope flickering for the first time in months. As she carried her find upstairs, a loose floorboard shifted, revealing the corner of a leather-bound book. Sophie pried it free, a maintenance logbook, the most recent entry dated October 1994. The handwriting on the final page read, "System winterized. God willing, someone will bring this heart back to life someday." The signature below was illegible, faded by time or perhaps smudged by a reluctant tear. Sophie tucked the book under her arm, a blueprint for survival if she was skilled enough to follow it. Back in the sitting room, Lily slept fitfully, her breathing still labored but steady. Sophie spread the manual on the floor and angled the weakening flashlight. The diagrams were meticulous, the instructions precise. She'd worked on more sophisticated systems in the Navy, but the principles remained the same: pressure, fuel, ignition, ventilation. The biggest challenge would be the pilot light and verifying the gas line hadn't deteriorated beyond safety. A calculated risk, but freezing was a certainty without heat. Morning brought weak sunlight filtering through gaps in the curtains. Sophie had spent the night studying the manual, planning her approach. Lily woke disoriented, fever slightly lower, but still concerning. Sophie rummaged through kitchen cabinets until she found an ancient can of chicken broth. The inspection date had faded decades ago, but the seal was intact. She punctured the top with her knife and warmed the contents using a small candle from her emergency kit. Not ideal, but Lily needed something warm. While her daughter sipped the broth, Sophie explained their situation in simplified terms. "We're going to stay here while your cough gets better. I'm going to fix the heat. It might take a few days." The gas meter outside was buried under snow. Sophie dug with her hands until fingers numbed, then used a piece of broken slate from the roof. The meter was ancient, the line capped with a rusted valve. Her father's voice echoed in memory, Jack Bennett, kneeling beside 8-year-old Sophie as he repaired their home furnace. "Most things can be coaxed back to life if you speak to them gently and understand how they breathe." She brushed away the remaining snow and examined the valve for hairline cracks. Finding none, she turned it a quarter inch, holding her breath. A faint hiss rose, then stabilized. No odor of mercaptan, the additive that gives natural gas its distinctive smell. A promising sign. Back in the basement, Sophie used the old maintenance logs to trace the gas line's path from entry point to boiler. 2 sections showed worrying corrosion. She found copper pipe and fittings in the toolkit and spent hours creating bypass sections, her hands working from muscle memory. During her 6 years in the Navy, she'd repaired engines under combat conditions, replaced hydraulic systems while waves threatened to wash her overboard. This was challenging, but familiar. A puzzle with life-saving consequences. The pilot assembly was next, corroded from disuse but salvageable. Sophie dismantled it completely, cleaning each component with material from the kit. The thermocouple would be the weak point. If it failed, the safety valve would prevent gas flow. She tested continuity using a multimeter from the toolkit, relieved to find it functional. By late afternoon, the reassembled pilot waited for its test. Sophie positioned Lily at the top of the stairs, safely distant but within voice range. "If anything happens, run outside immediately." "Don't wait for me." Lily's face crumpled in fear, but she nodded, understanding the gravity in her mother's tone. Sophie's hand trembled slightly as she pressed the pilot ignition. 1 spark, 2. On the third, a small blue flame caught and held. The ancient metal contracted and expanded, adjusting it to heat for the first time in decades. She watched the flame, unblinking, as it stabilized from unsteady flicker to constant burn. Only then did she activate the main burner. A deeper whoosh, followed by the distinctive ping of metal warming. Within minutes, the basement filled with the mechanical orchestra of awakening pops, creaks, the rush of water moving through pipes that had been dormant for years. Sophie ran upstairs, heart pounding. She placed her palm against a cast-iron radiator in the sitting room. For a long moment, nothing. Then the faintest hint of warmth, so slight she might have imagined it. Another minute passed. The metal warmed slowly, honestly, a promise being kept. Lily, come quick. The little girl ran barefoot into the room, face questioning. Sophie guided her hand to the radiator. Feel it, that's heat. Lily's eyes widened. Real heat. Sophie nodded, tears blurring her vision. Yes, real heat. That first night with heat became a silent celebration. They moved upstairs to a bedroom with intact windows and a large radiator. Sophie found linens in a hall closet, musty but usable after shaking out the dust. They huddled together under layers of blankets, listening to the comforting clank of the heating system working through the night. By morning, the room had reached a temperature where breath no longer fogged. Lily's fever broke during the night, her breathing easier. Small victories that felt monumental. Days passed in a rhythm of repair and discovery. Sophie focused on necessities, heat water, safety. She found the main water valve, thankful it had been properly drained before abandonment. Following the maintenance log's instructions, she slowly repressurized the system, moving through the mansion to tighten leaking joints and replace cracked washers from supplies in the toolkit. The first brown water from the kitchen tap eventually ran clear, not potable without boiling, but usable for cleaning. They established a home base in two connected rooms, upstairs, a bedroom, and what might have been a study. Sophie scavenged furniture from throughout the house, choosing pieces based on condition and utility rather than aesthetics. A mattress without visible damage, a desk where Lily could draw, chairs that held their weight without complaint. The basic framework of a temporary life assembled from the remnants of someone else's abandoned one. In quiet moments, Sophie's thoughts drifted to the past, to the day 6 months ago when everything collapsed. Paul's lawyer across the polished conference table, sliding documents with yellow sticky note arrows indicating signature lines. Paul himself conspicuously absent. The gentle pressure to sign quickly assurances that the agreement was standard equitable. Only later, too late, did she discover what she'd actually signed: papers that leveraged her military service-related PTSD against her, questioning her stability, her fitness as a mother. Papers that gave Paul primary custody, the house, most of their savings. Her signature on every page. The day she took Lily and ran had been surprisingly ordinary until it wasn't. A routine custody exchange, Lily returning from a weekend with her father. The casual comment from Paul's new girlfriend: "We've enrolled Lily in boarding school starting Monday. Switzerland has the best programs for gifted children." Sophie had smiled, hugged Lily goodbye to Paul, then walked to her car. She'd driven home, packed 2 bags, withdrawn the maximum from her ATM, and left the state before Paul realized she wasn't following the visitation schedule. 3 months of motels, campgrounds, friends' couches. 3 months of looking over her shoulder, of Lily's nightmares of dwindling resources. A noise outside interrupted her rumination, the distinctive crunch of tires on snow. Sophie tensed instinctively, positioning herself between the window and Lily. A vehicle appeared through the trees, not the sleek BMW of Paul's private investigator, but an aging mail truck, its boxy white shape incongruous against the winter landscape. It stopped at the broken gate. A man emerged, gray-haired and bearded, moving with the deliberate care of someone whose joints protested cold mornings. He studied the mansion, then the thin plume of smoke rising from the chimney, his posture registering surprise rather than alarm. Sophie watched as he followed their footprints to the door. Should she hide, pretend no one was there before she could decide? A knock echoed through the house, not aggressive but firm. The man's voice carried clearly. "Hello? Anyone in there? I'm Hank Williams, local mail carrier. Just checking if everything's all right." Sophie descended the stairs slowly, Lily trailing behind. Through the beveled glass panels flanking the door, she could see the man more clearly. Mid-60s, weathered face, kind eyes. He wore a standard Postal Service jacket with unofficial patches she recognized instantly: Vietnam veteran insignias, 173rd Airborne Brigade. A fellow service member. She opened the door cautiously, one hand still on her Swiss Army knife. "Didn't expect to see smoke from this old place," the man said, studying her face with calm assessment. "Been empty since the Hartfords left in '94. Folks around here call it the frozen house." "You folks moving in, just staying warm," Sophie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Hank nodded slowly, as if this made perfect sense. His gaze shifted to Lily, noting her pallor, the remnants of illness. "Got some medicine for that cough in my truck. Government doesn't know I make these unofficial stops." His smile revealed a chipped front tooth, somehow adding to rather than detracting from his trustworthiness. He returned with children's cough syrup, a thermos of coffee, and a paper bag containing sandwiches. Been delivering on this route 30 years, he explained, settling at the kitchen table she'd cleared of decades of dust. Know every mailbox, every family. The Hartford place has been waiting for someone. Thought it might fall down first. He sipped his coffee, studying Sophie over the rim. Military. She nodded, surprise. Navy, machinery technician, 6 years, 2 deployments. He smiled in recognition. Thought so. You carry yourself like someone who's seen the elephant. Vietnam for me. Combat engineer. Built things, blew them up sometimes on the same day. The conversation unlocked something in Sophie, the recognition of shared experience of a language spoken through posture and assessment rather than words. Hank didn't ask why they were there, seeming to understand that necessity rather than choice had driven them to the abandoned mansion. Instead, he offered practical information. The town of Silver Ridge lay 7 miles north, population 500. The sheriff patrolled the county roads sporadically at best. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles east, an elderly woman who rarely left her property. Sophie hesitated, then asked the question weighing on her. This place, who owns it? Now Hank's expression turned contemplative. On paper, bank foreclosed years ago, but they've never done anything with it. Tax records are a mess. Truth is, I think the county's forgotten about it. Happened after the mines closed. A lot of properties just fell through the cracks. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. However, there's a developer been sniffing around lately. Maxwell Reed, big money from Boston, wants to build some resort complex in the area. He's been buying up abandoned properties, making donations to the right politicians. Rumor is he's got his eye on this place too. The name sent an involuntary shiver through Sophie. Maxwell Reed, Paul's college roommate, occasional dinner guest in their former life. The connection seemed impossible, yet the coincidence disturbed her. She kept her face neutral, filing away the information for later consideration. As Hank prepared to leave, he handed her a small brass key. Mailbox still works. At the end of the drive. Figure you might need it. She accepted the offering, strangely moved by this simple acknowledgement of their presence, their legitimacy. That afternoon, Sophie continued her methodical restoration of basic services. The house's electrical panel needed assessment, a dangerous task but necessary. She located the main breaker box in a utility room, its metal doors sealed with decades of corrosion. Using tools from the basement cache, she carefully opened the panel. The wiring inside was older than she'd hoped, cloth-covered copper rather than modern insulation, but the craftsmanship was impeccable. No rodent damage visible, connections still tight. She tested circuits, systematically identifying those that could be safely energized and those requiring repair. By evening, a portion of the house had electricity, dim light from bulbs that had somehow survived abandonment outlets that could power the few devices they possessed. Sophie charged her phone, though there was no signal this far from town. The ability to see after dark without depleting flashlight batteries felt like incalculable wealth. Lily celebrated by drawing pictures at the desk, her small face illuminated by a brass lamp with a cracked but functional shade. The domestic normalcy of the scene brought an ache to Sophie's chest, how little it took to make her daughter happy after months of upheaval. The following day, Lily's health improved enough for exploration. Together, they ventured through the mansion's many rooms, Sophie assessing structural integrity, while Lily marveled at discoveries: a music room with a dust-covered grand piano, a library with thousands of volumes, a conservatory where dead plants still stood in ornate ceramic pots. In what appeared to be a child's bedroom, they found toys from another era: a wooden train set, tin soldiers, a dollhouse replicating the mansion itself in miniature detail. In the library, Lily pulled a leather-bound book from the shelf, dislodging something behind it. A photograph fluttered to the floor. Sophie picked it up, brushing away dust. Her breath caught. The image showed a group of people standing on the mansion's front steps. An older couple, presumably the Hartfords, flanked by what appeared to be business associates or family friends. And there at the edge of the group stood her father. Jack Bennett, 30 years younger, but unmistakable, his military posture and distinctive jawline immediately recognizable. The date stamp on the border read, September 1983. Sophie stared at the image, mind racing. Why had her father never mentioned this place? What connection did he have to the Hartford family? The postcard in the car, this photograph, pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. Lily noticed her mother's expression. Who's that? Sophie pointed to the young man in the corner. That's your grandpa. A long time ago, before I was born. Lily studied the image with renewed interest. He looks like you when you're serious. Sophie managed a smile. He was a very serious man, but kind in his way. That night, Sophie examined the photograph more closely. The older man, presumably Mr. Hartford, had his arm around her father's shoulders in a gesture of familiarity. Not just business acquaintances then, friends. On the back, faded handwriting read, Project Completion Celebration with our Savior Jack Bennett. Savior. The word triggered memories of bedtime stories her father had told engineering challenges. He'd overcome systems he'd designed to make dangerous work safer. He'd never specified locations or clients, maintaining the professional discretion that characterized his generation. The next morning brought heavy snow and an unexpected crisis. Sophie woke to the sound of water, not the gentle circulation through radiators, but the unmistakable rush of a burst pipe. She ran downstairs to find water cascading from the ceiling in the main hallway, freezing almost immediately on the marble floor. The sudden temperature change had stressed an old joint past breaking. She raced to the basement, locating the main water valve and shutting it off. The immediate danger halted, but the damage was done, water soaking into plaster, pooling on hardwood, threatening the structural integrity they depended upon. For hours, Sophie and Lily worked to mitigate the disaster, sopping up water with every absorbent material they could find, positioning buckets under persistent drips, using Sophie's knife to puncture bulging ceiling plaster and release trapped water before it could spread. By afternoon, the immediate crisis had passed, but the affected hallway resembled a war zone. Ceiling, partially collapsed floor, warped the beautiful molding, now water-stained and damaged. Sophie sat on the stairs, exhaustion settling into her bones. The burst pipe was a painful reminder of their vulnerability, of the mansion's fragility, despite its imposing exterior. Lily settled beside her small shoulder, pressing against Sophie's arm in silent solidarity. Mom, do we have to leave now? The question carried all the insecurity of recent months, the fear of another upheaval. Sophie wrapped her arm around her daughter's thin frame. No, kiddo, everything breaks before it gets better. We're staying. The repair consumed the next 2 days. Sophie located the damaged section in the library ceiling, a copper elbow joint that had split along a manufacturing flaw hidden for decades. The toolkit included soldering equipment, though the flux had hardened to uselessness. She improvised using beeswax from decorative candles found in the dining room, creating a temporary seal until proper materials could be obtained. The process was painstaking, working in the cramped ceiling space with inadequate light, but the result held when she cautiously restored water pressure. During the repair, Lily made another discovery. A hidden drawer in the library desk revealed when she accidentally pressed a decorative knob while climbing. Inside lay a bound collection of newspaper clippings, all concerning Hartford Mining Company. The headlines chronicled a story of rise and fall. Hartford silver strike, largest in county history, 1946. Hartford mine expansion creates 200 jobs, 1958. Tragic collapse at Hartford mine claims 5 lives, 1963. Hartford mine closes permanently, 1964. The final clipping from a Boston Business Journal dated 1965 read, Engineer J. Bennett designs revolutionary safety system for abandoned mine conversion. J. Bennett, her father. The pieces began to align his presence in the photograph, the Savior inscription, his connection to this place. He'd been involved in converting the abandoned mine to something else, something that required an enhanced safety system. But what and why had this been important enough to preserve in a hidden drawer, yet never mentioned in family history? The answers would have to wait. A more immediate concern presented itself on the 5th morning when a distinctive engine sound approached the mansion. Not Hank's mail truck, something larger, more powerful. Sophie positioned herself at an upper window, watching as a black SUV with tinted windows navigated the snow-covered drive. It stopped short of the house, the driver apparently unwilling to risk the deeper drifts. A man emerged from the passenger side, tall, late 50s, wearing an expensive overcoat and leather gloves. Even from a distance, his expression conveyed calculation rather than curiosity. Sophie felt her muscles tense, combat instincts awakening. The man surveyed the property methodically, noting the smoke from the chimney, the partially cleared walkway, the evidence of occupation. He made no attempt to approach the house. Instead, taking photographs with his phone, focusing on different angles of the structure and grounds. After 15 minutes of documentation, he returned to the vehicle, which reversed carefully down the driveway and disappeared among the trees. A scout, an assessment, the first move in a game Sophie hadn't agreed to play. She watched long after the SUV had vanished, the peaceful isolation of previous days shattered. Somewhere beyond the sheltering forest, someone now knew they were here. Someone connected to Maxwell Reed, to Paul, to the life she'd fled. The mansion suddenly felt less like sanctuary and more like exposure, a highly visible target on an otherwise empty landscape. That afternoon, Hank's mail truck returned, his expression grave as he trudged through the snow to the door. "Been hearing things in town," he said without preamble. "Reed's people are asking questions about smoke from the Hartford place. Planning commission meeting next week, they're fast-tracking approval for property acquisitions in the area." His gaze met Sophie's directly. "Whatever brought you here, whatever you're running from, it might be catching up." Hank carried more than warning. From his truck, he produced a toolbox, a propane camp stove, and groceries, practical support to match the information. "I was an engineer too," he explained, helping Sophie repair the electrical junction box damaged during the pipe leak. "In country, we learned to make do with whatever we had. Sometimes elegant solutions aren't available. Sometimes you just need things to work long enough to get through." His weathered hands worked steadily alongside hers, stripping wires, securing connections, his movements displaying the muscle memory of skills learned decades ago but never forgotten. As they worked, Hank shared what he knew of the Hartford family history. Old money originally from mining silver and later manufacturing. The mansion had been built in the 1890s, designed to showcase their success while providing a headquarters for operations. The family had weathered the Depression, 2 World Wars, and the boom and bust cycles of resource extraction. Their decline began with the mine collapse in '63, accelerated by lawsuits and changing markets. By the early '90s, the last Hartford Eleanor, in her late 40s, then had been forced to leave the maintenance costs, overwhelming reduced circumstances. "And the connection to my father?" Sophie finally asked. Hank's expression shifted, surprise followed by understanding. "Jack Bennett was your father, should have realized from the name. He was something of a local hero, at least to those who knew what he did." After the mine collapse, the shafts were deemed too dangerous for further extraction. But they still held value at the constant temperature, the isolation. The Department of Energy had interest. Can't say more than that, classified even after all these years. But your father designed the systems that made it possible. Saved the Hartford family from complete financial ruin, at least for a time. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Sophie stood at the library window watching snow accumulate in the weak security light she'd managed to repair. The mansion creaked around her, contracting in the dropping temperature. Not protest, but conversation. In Navy terms, the house had begun responding to helm commands, not fully seaworthy, yet but no longer actively sinking. The knowledge brought limited comfort against the growing certainty that their sanctuary had an expiration date. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows. The storm that had threatened all day had arrived in force, driving snow horizontally past the glass. Sophie moved to check the boiler, ensuring it could handle the increased demand. As she descended the basement stairs, a sound froze her mid-step, a distinct crack followed by rushing water. Not inside this time. Somewhere in the external supply line, vulnerable, despite her precautions. For the next 4 hours, Sophie battled against nature and physics. The main water pipe entering the basement had split at an exterior juncture, sending a high-pressure spray against the foundation wall. Water pooled ankle-deep before she could locate the exterior shutoff buried under 3 feet of snow. Using a camping lantern for illumination, she waded through frigid water to assess the damage. The fracture ran 6 inches along a corroded section where the pipe passed through the stone foundation, a stress failure triggered by the storm's temperature drop. Sophie worked methodically despite numbing cold and increasingly hostile conditions. She cut away the damaged section using a hacksaw from the toolkit, her hands so stiff she dropped the blade twice before completing the task. Replacing the section required adapter fittings to join modern PVC to ancient iron, a technical challenge even under ideal conditions. In howling wind, with water continuing to seep through the temporary dam she'd created, it became a battle of will against circumstance. Near midnight, Hank arrived unexpectedly, summoned by some sixth sense, or perhaps simply awareness of what the storm might do to vulnerable systems. Together, they completed the repair, his experience complementing her technical training. They worked in the synchrony of those accustomed to crisis communicating through gesture more than words, anticipating needs before they were expressed. When the final connection held and water flow restored without leakage, the shared triumph required no verbal acknowledgement, just the silent nod between people who had faced elemental forces and temporarily prevailed. Later, as they warmed themselves by the kitchen radiator, Hank spoke of Reed's ambitions for the area. The resort was merely cover for the real objective: access to the abandoned mine system beneath the Hartford property and adjacent lands. The Department of Energy installation had been decommissioned decades ago, but something within those tunnels still held value. Enough value for a man like Reed to spend millions acquiring surface rights, enough to warrant the political connections he'd cultivated. Whatever your father helped build down there, he finished, it's still important to someone. Important enough to go to considerable lengths to obtain. Sophie absorbed this, connecting it to her own situation. Not coincidence, then. Paul's friendship with Reed, the custody maneuvers, perhaps even her location being discovered. Pieces of a larger design she was only beginning to perceive. "You think he knows who I am?" she asked finally. Hank's expression remained carefully neutral. "Don't know, but if I were you, I'd prepare as if he might." As Hank prepared to leave, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway, not approaching, just idling beyond the tree line, watching. The black SUV from earlier, now accompanied by a second vehicle. Monitoring, waiting. Sophie felt exposed suddenly, the mansion's illuminated windows like targets in the darkness. Hank noticed her tension. "They're testing boundaries," he said quietly, "seeing how you'll react. Right now, you've got the advantage of the unknown. They haven't figured out exactly why you're here or what you know." His gaze met hers, serious but not unkind. "Question is, do you know why you're here?" Sophie had no answer. The photograph of her father, the postcard in her glove compartment, the toolkit that matched the boiler perfectly. Coincidences too precise to be random, too obscure to be engineered. She watched the headlights eventually retreat, leaving them in storm-muffled silence. Whatever connection existed between her father, this house, and the forces now circling it remained unclear. But one certainty had emerged from the chaos of recent days: the mansion had ceased being merely shelter. It had become a position to defend. That night, Sophie slept fitfully beside Lily, dreams filled with underground passages and her father's voice reciting pressure calculations. Outside, the storm raged until dawn, then subsided into eerie stillness. The morning light revealed a transformed landscape, snow-drifted 6 feet high against the mansion's north face. Trees bowed under white burden, the world erased and redrawn in simpler lines. Beautiful and unforgiving, like the choices that had brought her here that would determine what came next. In the kitchen, Sophie found a folded paper that had been slipped beneath the door, not threatening but nonetheless disturbing. A property assessment notice from the county, dated the previous week, indicating inspection scheduled for the Hartford estate. The official letterhead and signature looked genuine, but the timing felt orchestrated. The machinery of displacement had been activated. How long before Reed's legal team discovered her identity, connected her to Paul, to the custody situation? How long before official vehicles replaced the watching SUVs? Sophie refolded the notice and placed it in her pocket. Through the window, she could see Lily making snow angels in the clear area behind the house, face tilted toward weak sunlight. For the first time in months, her daughter looked like a child rather than a refugee, playing rather than enduring. The sight crystallized something within Sophie. This place, whatever its secrets, had given them that moment, had given them heat and light when darkness seemed absolute. That debt required repayment, required defense. She touched the photograph of her father, now kept in her jacket pocket like a talisman. "Whatever you built here, Dad, whatever you protected, I'm going to finish what you started." The house seemed to exhale around her, pipes ticking in what might have been approval. Outside, Lily's laughter rose above the whisper of wind through pine branches. A sound worth fighting for, worth staying for. The game had begun, the sides unclear, but the stakes absolute. Sophie Bennett, former Navy technician, current fugitive mother, reluctant inheritor of someone else's legacy, made her decision. They would not run again. This frozen house would either be their sanctuary or their last stand. 1 month crawled by in a blur of repair and restoration, each day measured not in hours but in systems recovered. Sophie's world narrowed to immediate challenges, repairing corroded pipes, replacing rotted floorboards, sealing drafts that turned rooms into wind tunnels. February in Silver Ridge County meant temperatures that rarely climbed above freezing, a constant battle against nature's determination to reclaim the mansion. The Hartford estate fought back in its way, surrendering its secrets reluctantly. Old houses had personalities, her father had once said. You don't renovate them, you negotiate. Lily thrived despite the circumstances, her resilience putting Sophie's military endurance to shame. The child had claimed the library as her domain, arranging the salvageable furniture into a fortress of books and imagination. She discovered a collection of field guides to the North American wildlife and spent hours identifying the birds that visited the neglected garden, recording their appearances in a journal Hank had brought her. The normalcy she created from their abnormal situation both impressed and wounded Sophie. Children shouldn't have to be this adaptable. In the entrance hall, Sophie had set up what she called the war room, a folding table covered with repair manuals, salvage tools, and a meticulous inventory of functioning systems versus those still requiring attention. Red for critical, yellow for functional, but compromised green for operational. Too much remained red. The eastern wing's plumbing remained unusable, 3 electrical circuits showed dangerous resistance levels, and the roof over the sunroom leaked consistently during weather events. Still, progress manifested in undeniable ways. 12 rooms now maintained livable temperatures. Running water flowed to the main bathrooms and kitchen, and strategic repairs had stabilized the most critical structural weaknesses. The morning light on the 29th day of their residence filtered through newly cleaned windows, casting geometric patterns across the worn parquet floor. Sophie stood at the sink washing breakfast dishes in hot water, a luxury still novel enough to feel miraculous when Lily's shout from the front room disrupted the routine. Cars, big ones, Sophie dried her hands, reflexively moving with practiced efficiency to the window. 2 vehicles had breached their sanctuary, a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows and a silver Lincoln Navigator, both gleaming incongruously against the winter-muted landscape. The kind of vehicles that announce money and influence before their occupants ever emerged. Through the rippled antique glass, Sophie watched as 4 figures exited the vehicles. From the Escalade, a tall man in a camel hair coat emerged, his silver hair styled with the precision of someone accustomed to camera readiness. Even at a distance, his movements conveyed practiced authority, not the earned authority of Hank's military bearing, but the purchased confidence of wealth. From the Navigator came 3 men in dark suits, clearly subordinates from their deferential postures. Sophie recognized the performative choreography of power from her ex-husband's business events. A principal and his entourage arriving to negotiate from a position of assumed advantage. Sophie pulled Lily away from the window. Stay upstairs until I call for you, no matter what you hear. Her daughter's eyes widened, but she nodded, the gravity in Sophie's tone, triggering the emergency protocols they'd established during their months on the run. Sophie checked her reflection in a tarnished hallway mirror, worn jeans, flannel shirt, hair pulled back in a utilitarian ponytail. Not the image of someone with legal standing or social influence, not someone who would intimidate men in $1,000 coats. But appearances had misled people about Sophie Bennett before. Let them underestimate. The knock came as she reached the bottom of the stairs, 3 sharp raps that managed to sound both polite and impatient. Sophie opened the door without hesitation, denying them the psychological advantage of making her wait. The silver-haired man's momentary surprise quickly transformed into a practiced smile. His teeth were too perfect, the kind of dental work that cost more than most people's vehicles. Maxwell Reed had to be. The calculated warmth in his expression didn't reach his eyes. I hope we're not intruding. I'm Maxwell Reed. This is a pleasant surprise. I wasn't aware anyone was occupying the Hartford property. His gaze swept past her to assess the interior cataloging details with the evaluation of a buyer at auction. The younger man beside him stepped forward. And I'm State Senator Walter Simmons. We're here on official county business regarding this property. May we come in? It's quite cold out here. The question carried the assumption of compliance as if permission were a mere formality. Sophie remained in the doorway, neither blocking them nor inviting them in. The temperatures actually improved. It was 20 below when we arrived. What kind of official business brings a private developer and a state senator to an abandoned house? Her directness visibly discomforted Simmons, whose politician's smile faltered momentarily. Reed, however, seemed to recalibrate his assessment of her, shifting from dismissive to calculating. I've been developing a comprehensive resort plan for this area. He explained, his tone modulating to something more conversational, less commanding. The Hartford estate is integral to that vision. Senator Simmons sits on the State Historical Preservation Committee, which is why he's accompanying me today. We're conducting preliminary site assessments. His smile returned, practiced charm at maximum wattage. I wasn't aware anyone had taken up residence. The property has been uninhabited for decades. Sophie maintained neutral eye contact, neither hostile nor accommodating. We found shelter during the storm last month. The house was abandoned, not maintained. My daughter was ill. I've made necessary repairs to make it habitable. Reed's expression shifted, microscopically interest, then something sharper. You've been repairing the place? Remarkable initiative, Miss. The question dangled, fishing for identification. Sophie deliberately ignored it. Senator Simmons shifted, his weight, discomfort evident in his posture. Well, this is awkward. You see, the county has been processing paperwork to clear the property's legal status. The Hartford estate has significant tax delinquency. The bank's interest was acquired by Reed Development last year, pending final approval. His tone suggested bureaucratic inevitability, as if the machinery of displacement had already been set in irreversible motion. Sophie absorbed this, maintaining her position in the doorway. Are you here to evict us? The bluntness of the question disrupted their script. Reed's smile tightened, professional courtesy straining against frustration. Not at all. There's a process for these matters. Legal notifications, proper documentation. He gestured expansively, a man accustomed to solving problems with money. Perhaps we could discuss a relocation allowance, assistance, finding suitable alternative housing. My company prides itself on ethical development practices. The term ethical development hung in the air, its inherent contradiction almost visible. Sophie studied Reed's face, recognizing the practiced sincerity that had characterized Paul during their divorce proceedings. I'll need to see official documentation regarding ownership transfer and eviction proceedings. Until then, we're staying. The temperature's dropping again tonight, and I've got repairs to finish. She nodded politely, but finally a dismissal delivered with the confidence of someone standing on their own property. Reed's facade cracked momentarily, genuine annoyance bleeding through his professional veneer. Ms. Whoever you are, I've been pursuing this property acquisition for 10 years. I've invested millions in this development plan. He leaned slightly forward, voice lowering. I understand desperation. I sympathize with your situation. But this is not a solution for you. His gaze flicked to the visible interior of the house, the signs of haphazard renovation. This isn't a project for amateurs, especially not a woman alone. The condescension crystallized something in Sophie's chest, not anger exactly, but clarification. This wasn't merely about property. This was about power, about who deserved to occupy space in the world. She'd experienced this moment before in Navy training, when instructors assumed she'd failed technical assessments in divorce court, when Paul's lawyer suggested her military service made her temperamentally unsuited for motherhood. The assumption that she should yield, that her claim to space and capability was inherently lesser. Mr. Reed, I've rebuilt hydraulic systems on destroyers during active deployment. I've restored power to a field hospital under enemy fire. This house may be challenging, but it's not beyond my capabilities. Her voice remained level, neither aggressive nor defensive. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a pressure valve that needs replacement before the temperature drops. Feel free to send any legal documentation through official channels. She closed the door with deliberate gentleness, the soft click somehow more definitive than a slam. Through the window, she watched Reed's momentary stillness, the recalculation happening behind his expensive haircut. He hadn't expected resistance. He'd anticipated fear, compliance, perhaps negotiation. Not calm dismissal, the men returned to their vehicles with the stiff movements of those unused to having their authority questioned. As they pulled away, Sophie exhaled slowly, the adrenaline she'd suppressed now coursing through her system. She'd just made an enemy, a powerful one. The isolation that had felt like protection now seemed like vulnerability. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, small face solemn. Are we in trouble? Sophie climbed to meet her, kneeling to eye level on the landing. Not trouble, just a complication. Those men think they own this house. We need to figure out if they're right. Lily processed this, her 9-year-old face contemplative beyond her years. But we fixed it. They didn't care about it before. Her child's sense of justice pierced through legal complexities to the moral center. Sophie squeezed her shoulder gently. You're right, we did fix it. And we're not leaving until someone shows us proof we have to. The next morning brought Hank's mail truck and concerning information. The county clerk had been unusually busy pulling property records for the Hartford estate he reported settling at their kitchen table with the comfortable familiarity he'd developed over the past month. Someone's building a case. Interesting timing, though. The property tax status is a mess. Records show payments through 1990 and then nothing until 2020 when a single payment arrived from a holding company. Not enough to clear arrears, just enough to establish some claim of interest. Sophie processed this while soldering a replacement section for the sunroom's leaking radiator, the metal heating to glowing orange beneath her torch. Hank watched her work with the appreciation of one craftsman for another. Technical skill transcended age and gender, creating its own language of competence. You've got steady hands. Reminds me of my squad's demolition expert. Could disarm a booby trap with a hangover during a monsoon. Never flinched. While the metal cooled, Sophie shared the details of Reed's visit, the implied threats beneath polished veneer. Hank's weathered face darkened. Reed's got a reputation, built his fortune buying distressed properties, usually after circumstances mysteriously became unfavorable for the original owners. 3 historic buildings in Portsmouth mysteriously developed structural issues after owners refused his offers. All subsequently condemned, purchased for pennies, then miraculously salvageable once he acquired them. They call him the heritage killer in preservation circles. The nickname sent a chill through Sophie that had nothing to do with the drafty kitchen. He knows Paul, my ex-husband. They were college friends, business connections. The coincidence seemed increasingly implausible. Hank considered this, his expression grave. Then this might not be just about the property. Might be about you specifically. Question is why? What makes this place worth pulling strings over? And what connection do you have that matters? That afternoon, Sophie continued her systematic repairs, focusing now on the Eastern Wing's plumbing system. The work provided physical outlet for mounting anxiety, each wrench turn and pipe fitting a tangible problem she could solve, unlike the nebulous threat gathering beyond the property line. She worked with methodical precision, tracing the mansion's circulatory system from main valve to furthest fixtures, replacing corroded sections, reinforcing joints stressed by decades of freeze-thaw cycles. This wasn't merely maintenance. It was battlefield medicine for a wounded structure. The precision of the work triggered memories of her Navy training, 18 months learning the intricate language of shipboard systems, the interdependence of components, the cascading consequences of failure. Chief Petty Officer Ramirez's voice echoed in her mind. You're not just fixing machines, Bennett. You're keeping your crew alive. They depend on these systems like they depend on their own hearts and lungs. Respect the responsibility. She'd carried that philosophy through 2 deployments, through marriage and motherhood, through divorce and displacement. Systems could be repaired if you understood their fundamentals. People were infinitely more complex. As dusk gathered, Sophie completed pressure testing on the newly restored section's, satisfaction momentarily outweighing concern as water flowed cleanly through pipes that had been dormant for years. The eastern bathroom's clawfoot tub filled with clear water pipes humming with revitalized purpose. Another victory against entropy, another room reclaimed from abandonment. She was tightening the final connection when Lily's voice, carried from downstairs, pitched higher than normal. Mom, someone's here, not the fancy cars. A different person. Sophie descended the stairs, quickly, wrench still in hand, to find Lily standing at the partially open front door. Beyond her small silhouette stood another figure, a young woman, perhaps early 20s, visibly pregnant beneath a coat inadequate for the season. Her face was pale with cold, and something else, the taut expression of someone running on pure adrenaline. The woman's eyes darted past Lily to Sophie, a mixture of desperation and wariness in her gaze. I'm sorry to intrude. The police said there's no room at the shelter in town. Someone at the diner mentioned people staying at the old Hartford place. The woman's voice trembled slightly, whether from cold or fear remained unclear. I just need somewhere for tonight. Please, I can pay a little. Her hand moved protectively to her swollen abdomen, the universal gesture of maternal protection. Sophie recognized the posture of someone at the end of options, someone for whom pride had become an unaffordable luxury. She'd seen it in her own mirror not long ago. The strategic risk assessment was automatic. Another person meant another potential security breach, another connection Reed could exploit, another resource drain on their limited supplies. The human assessment overrode it immediately. Come in before you freeze. I'm Sophie. This is my daughter, Lily. The young woman stepped inside, the relief in her body language palpable. Sarah Miller, thank you. I didn't know where else to go. Her eyes took in the entrance hall, the signs of ongoing renovation, the tools scattered on makeshift work tables, the strategic arrangement of functioning versus non-functioning spaces. Not what she'd expected clearly, but desperation eliminated choosiness. They settled Sarah in the kitchen, where the massive cast-iron stove now functioned enough to heat water for tea. Her story emerged in fragments between sips from a chipped Hartford family porcelain cup marriage at 19 to a local police deputy, gradual isolation escalating control, then violence that intensified with pregnancy. Her escape had been improvised during her husband's shift, using money hidden over months in the lining of an old coat. The details varied, but the architecture of abuse remained consistent with cases Sophie had encountered during her service. The systematic dismantling of a person's support system, the careful cultivation of helplessness. You can't go back to that, Sophie said finally, as Sarah's story concluded. The younger woman's hands tightened around her teacup. I know, but Kevin has the department behind him. His uncle is the sheriff. They've probably already filed a missing persons report, made it sound like I'm mentally unstable, a danger to myself. Her voice caught. It's how they handle these situations. I've seen it before with other women who tried to leave. The implications crystallized in Sophie's mind, not just the immediate humanitarian crisis of a pregnant woman in danger, but the strategic complication. If Sarah's husband had law enforcement connections harboring her, could provide legal pretext for examining the Hartford property, for questioning Sophie's own presence. The same system that had failed to protect Sarah could become the mechanism to displace them all. Yet the alternative, sending her back into danger or into the winter night, was unthinkable. You'll stay in the west bedroom. It's the warmest besides ours. We'll figure out next steps tomorrow. Sophie's decision solidified as she spoke it. The relief that washed over Sarah's face confirmed its necessity regardless of complications. Sometimes the tactically correct choice and the morally correct choice align perfectly. Sometimes they diverge, requiring prioritization of values over advantage. Her commanding officer had called these character navigation points, moments that define not just outcomes, but identity. The following morning brought new challenges. Lily woke with her fever, returned, her cough deeper and more concerning than during their arrival. The nearest pharmacy lay 5 miles away in Silver Ridge proper, a 10-mile round trip on foot through snow-covered terrain, with no guarantee the small-town drugstore would have what they needed. Sophie assessed their dwindling medical supplies, half a bottle of children's ibuprofen, throat lozenges, a thermometer, with failing batteries that showed Lily's temperature at 101.3. Not emergency level yet, but headed in a concerning direction. The decision calculus was complex. Leaving meant dividing their already limited defenses, exposing both the mansion and Lily to potential vulnerability during her absence. Staying meant watching her daughter's condition potentially deteriorate without proper medication. Sarah offered to remain with Lily, her own nursing assistant training, providing some reassurance of medical competence. Still entrusting her child to someone she'd met 12 hours earlier triggered every maternal alarm system Sophie possessed. In the end, necessity overrode caution. Sophie packed emergency supplies layered in her warmest salvage clothing and provided Sarah with explicit instructions for managing both Lily's care and potential visitors. If anyone comes, especially men in expensive vehicles, don't answer the door. If it's Hank, he'll identify himself with our signal knock. 3 short, 2 long. Her preparation had the thoroughness of a military operation, contingencies planned for every scenario she could anticipate. The journey into Silver Ridge proper became an endurance test, 5 miles through snowdrifts and partial thaws that turned solid ground treacherous. The small town materialized gradually through thinning trees. Its modest main street, a collection of salt-stained buildings with Old West architectural pretensions. Sophie noted security cameras on the newer structures, the subtle indicators of a community with limited law enforcement stretched across too much territory. The pharmacy occupied a corner location, its green cross sign flickering inconsistently above windows, cluttered with faded advertisements for flu shots and Medicare consultations. Inside, Sophie selected children's antibiotics, stronger fever reducers, a digital thermometer, and additional first aid supplies. The elderly pharmacist regarded her with the mild curiosity of someone in a town small enough that strangers remain notable. New around here, just passing through or staying a while, his tone suggested professional rather than suspicious interest. Sophie maintained the cover story she'd developed, consultant doing remote work renting outside town for the quiet. The pharmacist nodded, satisfied with the plausibility, if not convinced of accuracy. As she waited for the prescription, Sophie studied the community bulletin board, church announcements, snowplow services, lost pets. Among the faded notices, a newer flyer caught her attention. Public hearing Silver Ridge Economic Revitalization Plan, presented by Reed Development Group. Scheduled for the following week at the town hall, the accompanying architectural rendering showed a sprawling resort complex dominating the landscape where the Hartford estate currently stood, the mansion itself conspicuously absent from the future vision. The walk back felt longer, each step weighted by the implications of what she'd seen. Reed wasn't operating in isolation, but systematically building community support, political backing, and legal framework for his plans. Her improvised residence in an abandoned mansion stood against the machinery of corporate development, local economic interests, and political connections, a contest with overwhelmingly unfavorable odds. By the time the Hartford estate came into view beyond the tree line, Sophie had mentally cataloged their vulnerabilities and painfully few advantages. Inside, she found Lily sleeping peacefully, her fever slightly reduced thanks to cold compresses Sarah had applied. The younger woman sat beside the bed, one hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly, the other holding a damp cloth ready for the next fever spike. The scene crystallized something Sophie had been struggling to articulate. The Hartford mansion wasn't merely shelter from elements and pursuers. It had become a sanctuary in the original sense, a place of safety for the vulnerable, a structure that embodied protection itself. This realization had barely formed when the sound of vehicle engines growled up the driveway. Not the purring luxury of Reed's Escalade or the rattling familiarity of Hank's mail truck, but the muscular rumble of industrial equipment. Sophie moved to the front windows to see a county maintenance truck and a van marked Northern Construction Services parking in the circular drive. 4 men emerged carrying clipboards and wearing the official-looking safety vests of those authorized to access properties for assessment. One photographed the exterior methodically, while another consulted documentation with theatrical thoroughness. Sophie recognized the performance from her Navy days, the manufactured legitimacy of those operating just beyond their authority, but counting on appearance to override scrutiny. She'd seen contractors use similar approaches to gain access to restricted areas on base, presenting credentials with confidence that suggested higher clearance than actually possessed. The men conferred briefly. Then the apparent leader approached the front door and knocked with the authoritative cadence of someone expecting compliance. Sophie opened the door, partially blocking physical entry with her body, while maintaining an expression of neutral inquiry. The man's practiced smile didn't reach his eyes. "County Property Assessment Team, ma'am. We're conducting structural evaluation of potentially hazardous abandoned buildings in the area." His credential badge flashed quickly, too briefly for actual verification. "We'll need access to inspect for code violations and safety concerns." The performance was polished, designed to trigger automatic compliance from those conditioned to respect official authority. Sophie studied the credentials more carefully than the man anticipated, noting the inconsistent formatting compared to Hank's official postal identification. "I'll need to see the official inspection order, please. And verification that you've coordinated with the Historical Preservation Commission, since this property is over 50 years old and potentially eligible for registry protection." She kept her tone professional, matching bureaucratic challenge with bureaucratic counter-challenge. The man's expression flickered uncertainty, replacing confidence momentarily. Behind him, the other workers had already begun unloading equipment, not the simple inspection tools one would expect for assessment, but heavier machinery, including what appeared to be industrial cutting equipment. One unloaded what looked suspiciously like chemical containers, the kind used for industrial cleaning, or more concerning, degrading structural materials. Sophie's internal threat assessment escalated from suspicious to imminent. This wasn't inspection. This was calculated sabotage disguised as official business. I'm going to need you to leave the property until you can provide proper documentation and advance notice. She infused her voice with the command presence she'd developed as a petty officer, the tone that expected immediate compliance. The lead man's facade cracked, further annoyance seeping through. Listen, lady, we've got authorization from the county administrator and Mr. Reed's development office. This place is a hazard. We're just doing our job. His hand moved to push the door wider, a physical escalation Sophie had anticipated. In a fluid motion, she produced her phone, its camera already recording. I'm documenting this interaction for legal purposes. Please state your name, position, and the specific county ordinance authorizing forced entry without court order or emergency circumstances. Her military training had included approaches to de-escalating confrontation through strategic application of procedure and documentation. People operating outside proper authority typically retreated when their actions became officially observed and recorded. The tactic worked. The man stepped back, signaling his team with a sharp gesture. There'll be another inspection, he said, abandoning pretense for open hostility, with proper paperwork and police escort if necessary. Mr. Reed doesn't appreciate people interfering with county business. He turned away, the performance of officiality abandoned entirely. As the vehicles pulled away, Sophie noted one worker photographing the mansion's utility connections, paying particular attention to the recently repaired water main. The implication was clear. What couldn't be accomplished through intimidation might be attempted through infrastructure sabotage. When Hank arrived that afternoon, Sophie recounted the confrontation while they examined the boiler system for signs of strain under continuous operation. His expression darkened as she described the equipment the men had unloaded. Standard Reed operation. They would have found structural concerns requiring immediate condemnation. Create hazards where none exist, then use those fabricated hazards to force evacuation. The tactic sounded familiar, similar to strategies Paul had employed during their divorce, manufacturing circumstances, then leveraging those circumstances for advantage. Hank reached into his mailbag and produced a folded newspaper, the Silver Ridge Weekly Chronicle. The headline announced major resort development promises economic revival, accompanied by a photograph of Reed and Senator Simmons shaking hands before an architectural rendering. The smaller headline beneath read, Historic Properties to be Repurposed for Tourism Showcase. Sophie scanned the article quickly, noting the carefully crafted language about revitalizing underutilized historic assets and preserving architectural heritage through adaptive commercial development. Well, the newspaper contained something else, a formal notice from the Silver Ridge County Clerk's Office regarding property inspection and potential condemnation proceedings for the Hartford estate, authorized by the county commissioner and endorsed by the state senator's office. The notice provided 72 hours for current occupants to vacate the premises pending safety evaluation. Official letterhead, official signatures, official process. The machinery of displacement advancing from implied to explicit. We need legal help, Hank said, finally folding the newspaper with deliberate precision. My brother-in-law's daughter practices property law over in Millfield. Martha Jenkins, semi-retired now, but sharp as they come, clerked for the state Supreme Court back in the 80s. I'll give her a call. Sophie nodded, grateful for the alliance, but realistic about their position. Even the best legal representation operated within systems already aligned against them. Rural county governance, development interest, political connections. The legal path offered delay rather than solution. That evening, while Lily's fever finally broke under the influence of proper medication, Sophie focused on pragmatic preparation rather than abstract worry. The most immediate vulnerability was Electrical Reed's team could easily cut power to the estate with minimal effort and perfect deniability. A maintenance issue could leave them in darkness and, more critically, without the electricity needed to operate the boiler system's circulation pumps. Without those pumps, the heating system would fail within hours. Sophie inventoried their resources. The abandoned workshop contained an old generator, non-functional, but potentially salvageable. The toolkit included basic electrical repair equipment. Hank had brought additional supplies, including fuel stabilizer and fresh spark plugs. Through the night, she worked on the generator by lantern light, methodically cleaning corroded connections, rebuilding the carburetor, testing ignition components. The work was intricate and familiar, reminiscent of her duties maintaining emergency systems aboard ship. Mechanical systems followed rules, responded to understanding and respect. Unlike people, Unlike the law, by morning the restored generator hummed with cautious life, not powerful enough to operate the entire mansion, but sufficient to maintain essential systems if commercial power failed. Sophie installed manual transfer switches to allow critical circuits to draw from either power source, creating redundancy against the most obvious attack vector. The work left her hands grimy with old oil and her mind clearer than it had been since Reed's initial appearance. Practical problems invited practical solutions. Preparation created options. Options preserved hope. While Sophie fortified their physical infrastructure, Lily established connection to the outside world. Hank had provided a satellite internet hotspot, expensive but independent of local infrastructure, impossible to disable without sophisticated jamming equipment. Lily used the connection to enroll in online classes through a program for traveling families, creating educational normalcy despite their uncertain circumstances. Sarah assisted her previous experience as a teacher's aide, proving unexpectedly valuable. The mansion's library became a makeshift classroom, Lily's lessons continuing despite external threats. On the third day after the failed inspection, the anticipated retribution arrived. Sophie woke to Lily's concerned call from downstairs. The taps aren't working, the water stopped. Investigation confirmed Sophie's suspicion. The main water supply had been disconnected at the street, the valve padlocked with an official county utilities department lock. Through binoculars, she could see fresh tire tracks leading to the connection point, the snow tamped down by multiple sets of footprints. A paper notice fluttered from the padlock, too distant to read but its official formatting visible even at range. Sophie assessed their position dispassionately as she'd been trained to evaluate battle damage. Water reserves included 3 bathtubs she'd filled preemptively, anticipating this tactic. Approximately 150 gallons total. With strict conservation, perhaps a week's supply for 3 people. Melted snow could supplement for non-consumption needs. Not a critical emergency yet, but a significant escalation in pressure tactics. Reed was deploying his influence, systematically tightening the screws in textbook fashion. The situation demanded countermeasures beyond passive defense. Sophie cleared space in the workshop and began constructing a rainwater collection system using materials salvaged from throughout the mansion. Copper gutters redirected to storage containers. Filtration achieved through a series of progressively finer screens, culminating in a carbon filter constructed from charcoal and sand. For drinking water, she rigged a distillation system using kitchen equipment, a large pot connected to copper tubing that coiled through cold water before depositing purified condensation into collection vessels. Not elegant, but effective. The Navy had taught her that survival often depended on improvisation rather than ideal solutions. While Sophie battled infrastructure challenges, Hank expanded their alliance. Martha Jenkins arrived on the 4th day, a steel-haired woman in her late 60s, whose practical wool coat and sensible boots belied her former status as one of the state's most formidable property rights attorneys. She surveyed the mansion with professional assessment rather than personal judgment, noting the improvements Sophie had made alongside the original architectural features. Her legal briefcase contained something unexpected: the original property records for the Hartford estate dating back to 1892, obtained through connections at the county records office. The deed history revealed complexities that changed their strategic position. The Hartford family had placed the property in an unusual trust structure before financial difficulties forced apparent abandonment. The bank foreclosure Reed cited had targeted only the family's personal debt obligations, not the underlying property rights, which remained legally separated through the trust mechanism. The structure had created a legal gray area, neither fully abandoned nor clearly owned, existing in bureaucratic limbo for decades. This ambiguity explained Reed's elaborate approach. He couldn't simply purchase the property outright because clear title couldn't be established without resolving the trust status. Most interestingly, Martha discovered the trust documents specified a contingency provision allowing for transfer of rights to property caretakers who maintain the estate for a continuous period in the absence of Hartford family management. A 19th century legal mechanism designed to prevent abandonment of family holdings during periods of financial distress. Essentially, by restoring and occupying the mansion, Sophie had unknowingly initiated a potential ownership claim under terms established by the original Hartford family over a century earlier. It's not definitive, Martha cautioned, arranging the documents on the kitchen table they'd repurposed as a legal command center. but it gives us grounds to file for emergency injunction against any eviction or condemnation proceedings, forces them to address the trust status before taking action against current occupants. Her practical optimism provided the first genuine legal hope since Reed's appearance. Not victory, but legitimate grounds for battle. Sometimes that made all the difference. While legal strategy developed, physical preparations continued. Sophie created a rudimentary perimeter alert system using materials throughout the house: fishing line from an old tackle box found in a storage closet, suspended cans containing metal scraps strategically placed to detect approach from any direction. Inside, she reinforced vulnerable entry points without creating obvious barricades that might justify safety concerns. The preparations weren't paranoid but pragmatic. Reed had demonstrated willingness to use unofficial methods, and Sarah's presence created additional security considerations given her husband's law enforcement connections. On the eighth day, while replacing rotted floorboards in the main hallway, Lily made a discovery that shifted their understanding of the mansion itself. One section of paneling in the library sounded different when tapped, not the solid response of wood against structural elements, but the resonant echo suggesting space beyond. Sophie examined the section, carefully identifying subtle inconsistencies in the decorative molding that might indicate a concealed mechanism. Her fingers traced the woodwork methodically until one carved rosette rotated slightly under pressure. A click sounded and a section of bookcase swung inward on hidden hinges. Beyond lay a small room, perhaps 8 feet square, untouched by the decades of neglect that had affected the main house. The space contained a simple desk, filing cabinets, and walls lined with maps, geological surveys of the area showing the extensive mine workings beneath the Hartford property. Most striking was a glass case containing what appeared to be military service medals and photographs of men in uniform. Among them, unmistakably, stood a younger Jack Bennett, receiving a commendation from a senior officer, the Hartford mansion visible in the background. Sophie examined the room's contents with growing confusion. The filing cabinets yielded folders marked with government classification symbols she recognized from her own service: confidential, secret, top secret, SCI. The dates spanned from 1965 through 1994, consistent with the period following the mine's official closure. One photograph showed her father alongside men in Department of Energy insignia, standing before a reinforced tunnel entrance. The Hartford silver mine hadn't merely been abandoned. It had been repurposed for something classified enough to require dedicated security infrastructure and ongoing government interest. The discovery contextualized Reed's persistence, the resources deployed against seemingly simple squatters. Whatever lay beneath the Hartford estate held value beyond historical significance or resort development, potential value sufficient to justify elaborate legal maneuvering, political alliance, and progressive intimidation tactics. Sophie's presence wasn't merely inconvenient, but potentially threatening to interests that extended beyond local real estate development. Her father's involvement suggested dimensions she couldn't yet fully comprehend, connections that might explain why she'd found his postcard in her glove compartment at precisely the moment she needed shelter. These revelations were still coalescing when the mansion's newly established alert system triggered cans clattering at the eastern perimeter, followed by the distinctive sound of vehicle engines approaching at speed, rather than the cautious pace of previous visitors. Through the library window, Sophie saw 3 vehicles: an unmarked police cruiser, leading Reed's Escalade, and a county maintenance truck. The escalation pattern had reached its logical conclusion: official enforcement paired with private interest, authority, and influence combined to overcome resistance. Sophie activated their emergency protocol, a system established precisely for this scenario. Sarah and Lily moved to the secret room, which offered both concealment and secondary exit through a passage they'd discovered leading to the conservatory. Hank and Martha took positions as legal witnesses, prepared to document proceedings with phones in Martha's small legal recorder. Sophie herself moved to the entrance hall, stance relaxed but prepared position, where hallway lighting cast her features in clear visibility while leaving the mansion's interior in comparative shadow. Psychological advantage through environmental control. Another lesson from military confrontation management. The knocking, when it came, held the distinctive rhythm of law enforcement, authoritative demand rather than social inquiry. Sophie opened the door to find a uniformed deputy, young and visibly uncomfortable, flanked by Reed and a man in county maintenance coveralls. The deputy cleared his throat, consulting a clipboard with deliberate focus that suggested script reading rather than genuine procedural adherence. Ma'am, I'm serving official notice of condemnation proceedings for this structure, along with immediate evacuation order, due to critical safety violations identified by county inspection. His eyes flicked to Reed, momentarily seeking confirmation he delivered the lines correctly. Sophie accepted the proffered documents with calm deliberation, scanning them while maintaining awareness of positioning and body language among the group at her door. The paperwork showed the superficial authenticity of bureaucratic process official seals, signatures, procedural citations, while revealing substantive inadequacies to informed review. Martha had coached her on specifically what to seek: proper notification periods, required engineering assessments, historical preservation, review documentation. The hurried assembly of the condemnation order had sacrificed procedural completeness for speed of execution. I've reviewed these documents, Sophie stated, her voice carrying the neutral authority she'd cultivated during military service. They're procedurally deficient under State Code Section 1542, which requires independent structural engineering assessment before condemnation of structures with historical significance. Additionally, they fail to address the Hartford Family Trust provisions regarding property maintenance rights. She maintained direct eye contact with the deputy rather than Reed, addressing the nominal authority rather than the actual orchestrator. Our attorney has filed for emergency injunction pending resolution of these matters. The court date is Tuesday. The deputy's discomfort visibly increased. Clearly, he hadn't been briefed on potential legal complications or counterfilings. Reed stepped forward, abandoning pretense of process for direct confrontation. This is becoming absurd. You're an unauthorized occupant in a dangerous, abandoned structure. There are no rights to assert here. His controlled professional demeanor had fractured, revealing the entitlement but the beneath polished veneer. The county has full authority to condemn unsafe properties and remove trespassers. His hand gesture encompassed both the mansion and Sophie herself, as if both were equally inconvenient obstacles. Martha emerged from the hallway's shadow, her legal credentials displayed with the practiced flourish of decades in courtrooms. I've filed notice with the circuit court contesting both the condemnation process and underlying ownership claims by Reed Development. My client has established occupancy rights under the caretaker provisions of the original Hartford Trust. She passed copies of court filings to the increasingly uncomfortable deputy. Judge Harmon has scheduled emergency hearing for Tuesday morning. No action can be taken against the property or its occupants until judicial review is complete. Reed's expression darkened to something approaching genuine anger rather than tactical frustration. This is a delaying tactic, nothing more. His attention shifted fully to Sophie, recognition finally registering in his features. I know who you are now. Bennett, Paul's ex-wife. This makes much more sense. The coincidence was too perfect to believe. His tone shifted to something approaching conspiratorial, as if they shared understanding beyond others present. Whatever game you are playing, whatever leverage you think you found here, it won't work. Paul explained your instabilities, how you fabricate conspiracies, imagine threats, how you endangered your own child with paranoid delusions. The attack was calculated to provoke emotional response to trigger the PTSD Paul had weaponized during their divorce. Sophie recognized the tactic precisely because of her therapeutic work addressing those vulnerabilities. Reed was attempting to recreate the courtroom dynamic that had cost her custody, stability, credibility. The realization brought not distress, but clarity. Confirmation that the connections between Reed Paul and her current situation weren't paranoid imagination, but deliberate orchestration. Mr. Reed, whether this property becomes part of your development plans or not, will be determined through proper legal channels. Until then, we're lawfully maintaining residence under established property rights precedent. Sophie maintained neutral professionalism, denying him the emotional escalation he sought. If you have concerns about structural safety, I'm happy to arrange inspection by independent engineers jointly selected by all parties. Her counteroffer placed the interaction back within procedural framework rather than personal confrontation, a de-escalation technique that simultaneously reasserted legitimate process. The standoff continued momentarily. Reed's calculated intimidation meeting unexpected resistance in the form of legal preparation and emotional discipline. Finally, he stepped back with theatrical resignation. Tuesday, then, Though I wonder how safe anyone truly is in a structure with documented hazards, especially a young child. The implied threat hung in the air like wood smoke, not direct enough for legal consequence, but unmistakable in intent. The deputy, clearly relieved to escape the increasingly uncomfortable situation, retreated to his vehicle with mumbled acknowledgement of the court date. As the procession of vehicles departed, Sophie remained in the doorway watching until they disappeared beyond the property's tree line. The confrontation represented both escalation and temporary reprieve. Reed had deployed official resources and revealed personal connection to her situation, yet legal countermeasures had created breathing room. Not victory, but survival. In combat situations, sometimes survival for another day constituted the only available success metric. The strategic situation had clarified through crisis. Reed's interest encompassed both the property itself and apparently some personal vendetta connected to her ex-husband. The hidden room suggested government installation beneath the estate, explaining the disproportionate resources deployed against simple squatters. Her father's involvement connected these elements in ways she couldn't yet fully articulate, but increasingly sensed formed coherent pattern rather than coincidence. The Tuesday court appearance offered deadline and focus for their defensive preparations. That evening, as Sophie conducted maintenance on their water filtration system, Sarah's sudden gasp interrupted the mansion's quiet routine. The pregnant woman stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand pressed against her abdomen, face contorted in mixture of surprise and concern. I think my water just broke. The medical emergency introduced critical new variables to their already complex situation. Sarah needed professional care neither Sophie nor Hank could provide, yet leaving the mansion meant exposure to both Reed's influence and her husband's law enforcement connections. The decision calculus shifted when Sarah's first genuine contraction arrived. Minutes later, the young woman's face whitening with pain intensity that transcended normal discomfort. The nearest hospital lay 30 miles away in Millfield. The local clinic in Silver Ridge would have minimal obstetrical equipment and staff while potentially exposing Sarah to her husband's colleagues. Every option carried significant risk profiles, yet childbirth waited for neither strategic planning nor optimal circumstances. Outside, nature eliminated options with characteristic indifference to human planning. Heavy snow had begun falling an hour earlier, accumulation already reaching 4 inches with forecasts calling for potential blizzard conditions overnight. The road to town, marginally passable in clear weather, would become increasingly treacherous with each passing hour. Sophie assessed their situation with the clarity of military triage. Immediate evacuation carried greater risk than sheltering in place, despite suboptimal medical resources. The mansion's dining room became improvised delivery room, the massive table cleared and covered with clean linens Sophie had laundered weeks earlier. Hank departed immediately for Silver Ridge, despite deteriorating conditions, seeking medical supplies and attempting to contact the clinic's nurse practitioner who might brave the weather for emergency assistance. Martha established phone connection with obstetrical specialists at Millfield Hospital, securing remote guidance for the increasingly inevitable unassisted delivery. Sophie's combat medical training had included emergency childbirth basics knowledge intended for battlefield conditions where evacuation proved impossible. She arranged their limited medical supplies methodically, establishing sterile field as effectively as possible using boiled water and alcohol. Lily assisted with surprising composure, preparing additional hot water and organizing clean towels with the focused efficiency of someone channeling fear into productive action. Sarah alternated between determination and terror as contractions intensified, her body progressing through labor with the relentless biology that acknowledged neither convenience nor preparation. The storm intensified as evening deepened, wind driving snow horizontally past windows, temperature plummeting towards single digits. Electricity flickered twice before stabilizing the mansion's ancient wiring, straining under demands of heating system and essential lighting. Sophie's restored generator stood ready in the workshop, insurance against infrastructure failure at the most critical moment. Despite external chaos, the mansion's interior maintained surprising calm, the steady heartbeat of the boiler system, the warm glow of lamps, the focused purposefulness of emergency response, replacing panic with procedure. Sarah's labor progressed with textbook regularity, despite non-textbook setting. Each contraction brought the inevitable closer, each momentary reprieve, allowing preparation for the next stage. Sophie maintained calm expertise. She didn't entirely feel projecting confidence, while following the hospital's telephone instructions with meticulous attention. Though she'd never attended childbirth before, the fundamental principles aligned with crisis management training: maintain calm, follow established protocols, adapt to changing conditions without abandoning core procedures. Near midnight, as the storm reached maximum intensity, Sarah entered transition phase, the most intense period before delivery. Her cries echoed through rooms that had stood empty for decades, the mansion bearing witness to most fundamental human experience after years of silence. Sophie positioned herself as directed by the medical team on speakerphone, hands steady despite the enormous responsibility. Lily held Sarah's hand with fierce determination, whispering encouragement with the intuitive compassion children sometimes access more readily than adults. The moment of delivery arrived with sudden clarity amid hours of incremental progress. One final push, Sarah's face contorted with effort beyond exhaustion, and new life emerged into Sophie's waiting hands, tiny, slippery, perfectly formed. A girl red-faced and indignant, announcing her arrival with healthy wails that filled the mansion's cavernous spaces. Sophie cleared airways with the bulb syringe as instructed, wrapped the newborn in clean towels, and placed her on Sarah's chest, where instinctive recognition transformed exhaustion to wonder on the new mother's face. As Sophie completed necessary post-delivery procedures, following telephone medical guidance with careful precision, she found herself unexpectedly moved by the scene before her. In this abandoned mansion, claimed from neglect and defended against powerful interests, new life had entered the world, messy, demanding perfectly ordinary miracle. The contrast between external hostility and internal creation crystallized something she'd felt building since their arrival. The Hartford estate wasn't merely shelter or strategic position, but something more fundamental. It had become home, not through legal ownership or property rights, but through the moments that transform spaces into sanctuaries, healing, learning, creating beginning. Outside, the storm continued its assault against stone walls and slate roof, winter attempting final conquest before inevitable surrender to spring. Inside, the mansion's heartbeat continued, radiators ticking with circulating heat, generator humming in standby readiness, newborn breathing in perfect rhythm against her mother's chest. Sarah looked up at Sophie, exhaustion and wonder competing in her expression. What happens after the storm? The question encompassed far more than weather. Sophie checked the tiny infant's pulse as she'd been instructed, finding it strong and steady beneath impossibly delicate skin. We keep going, one day at a time. Some challenges you can't prepare for. You just meet them when they come. In the library, Lily had fallen asleep amid the books she'd arranged as makeshift medical references. Martha covered her with a blanket before joining Sophie in the kitchen, where they allowed themselves momentary relaxation with tea brewed from the last of Hank's supplies. The attorney's expression combined professional assessment with genuine concern. Tuesday's hearing is just the beginning. Reed won't stop with one legal challenge. Whatever he's after here, he's invested too much to abandon easily. Her gaze met Sophie's directly. I need to know what's in that hidden room. What's underneath this property that makes it worth all this? Sophie considered the question as she monitored the stove, maintaining water temperature for post-delivery cleaning. The truth was both simpler and more complex than legal strategy might accommodate. I don't know exactly. My father was involved in something here, something government-related after the mine closed. Something important enough for classification. Important enough that decades later, someone like Reed would deploy considerable resources to acquire it. She paused, the pieces aligning in patterns that suggested meaning without confirming it. But I think that's why I'm here. Why I found my father's postcard at exactly the moment we needed shelter. Why the toolkit contained exactly what the boiler needed. I think he left breadcrumbs, just in case someone like me ever needed to find this place, to protect it. Martha nodded slowly, neither accepting nor rejecting the theory's speculative elements, while acknowledging its emotional truth. Well, whatever your father started, you've certainly continued. This place was dying when you found it. Now it's got heat, water, electricity. She glanced toward the dining room where Sarah rested with her newborn. And new life, that's no small accomplishment. Her practical assessment cut through potential sentimentality to fundamental truth, whatever lay beneath in tunnels or behind in history. Sophie's presence had transformed the mansion itself from abandoned relic to functioning sanctuary. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3, its mechanism restored through Sophie's patient maintenance. In 4 hours, dawn would arrive, illuminating a transformed landscape, pristine snow concealing the mansion's deteriorated extremities, nature's temporary renovation. In less than 72 hours, they would stand in court challenging forces with vastly superior resources and influence. The odds remained overwhelmingly unfavorable by objective assessment. Yet Sophie felt strangely optimistic as she checked the boiler one final time before attempting sleep. They had transformed frozen emptiness into warmth and light once. Perhaps they could perform similar alchemy with justice. Word of the warm house spread through Silver Ridge County like thawing water. First a trickle, then a steady flow, impossible to contain. It began with whispers at the local diner where Hank stopped for coffee stories of the once frozen Hartford mansion, now housing a young mother and newborn, delivered during the worst blizzard in decades. The tales grew with each retelling a Navy veteran reclaiming abandoned heritage, a secret government facility beneath century-old stone, a corporate tycoon deploying political machinery against a woman who dared stand her ground. Truth and embellishment intertwined until the mansion transformed from local curiosity to modern folklore. Tuesday's court hearing brought unexpected victory. Judge Harmon, a weathered jurist whose family had lived in the county for 6 generations, granted the temporary injunction against condemnation proceedings. The technical ruling hinged on procedural failings in Reed's hasty paperwork, but the judge's commentary suggested deeper consideration. These rushed proceedings smack of improper influence and disregard for established property rights procedures. This court will not be party to circumventing due process regardless of the parties involved. The narrow legal win provided breathing room rather than resolution, postponing final determination for 30 days, pending proper historical assessment and thorough review of the Hartford Trust documentation. Reed's response came swiftly and strategically. By Wednesday morning, county workers had disconnected electrical service to the mansion, citing safety concerns about outdated wiring. Sophie's meticulously restored generator became their lifeline, its steady drone a constant reminder of their precarious independence. The limited fuel supply created new mathematical challenges: careful calculation of essential versus non-essential systems, precise rationing to maintain heat and minimal lighting, while conserving resources for the uncertain timeline ahead. Lily adapted with characteristic resilience, declaring their generator-powered evenings pioneer nights in organizing shadow puppet performances in the library. Martha's legal investigation uncovered disturbing patterns in Reed's development history. 3 historic properties in neighboring counties had experienced suspicious infrastructure failures shortly after their owners rejected his purchase offers. Each subsequently faced condemnation, allowing acquisition at fractions of market value. The tactic appeared in Reed Development's activities across 5 states, sophisticated enough to avoid obvious legal liability while maintaining consistent effectiveness. The company's proposed heritage resort projects typically underwent substantial modifications after acquisition, final developments bearing little resemblance to the community-friendly proposals used to secure initial approvals. The arrival of Eleanor Hartford transformed their defensive position from tenuous to legitimate. The elderly woman appeared one morning in a taxi from Millfield, her silver hair elegantly coiffed, her posture regal despite physical frailty. Lily discovered her on the porch, a single suitcase beside her, eyes moving over the mansion's facade, with the complex emotion of someone returning to a place both beloved and feared. "I've been watching the news reports. It seems the frozen house has finally remembered how to breathe." Her voice carried the cultivated diction of old New England money authority, wrapped in gentility. Eleanor's presence provided living connection to the mansion's history and legitimate standing regarding the trust provisions. Over tea served in her family's own porcelain cups, she shared the estate's complete narrative: the mining fortune that built it, the social prominence it represented, the gradual decline following the mine disaster, and finally her painful departure in 1994, when maintenance costs overwhelmed the remaining resources. Reed had approached her repeatedly over the years, offering increasing sums for formal renunciation of any residual claims through the trust. "I always refused, though I couldn't articulate why. Something felt wrong about his interest, too persistent, too focused on the underground portions rather than in the house itself." The most significant revelation came when Eleanor produced a leather portfolio containing the original trust documents, family correspondence, and legal addenda spanning more than a century. The papers confirmed Martha's preliminary findings while adding crucial details. The Hartford Trust included specific provisions for succession outside direct family lines in cases where non-relatives demonstrated commitment to maintaining the property's integrity and purpose. The mechanism had been designed specifically to prevent corporate acquisition during periods when family fortunes ebbed. Most critically, Eleanor remained the trust's legal administrator despite financial inability to maintain the property itself. With formal authority clarified, Eleanor executed the trust's succession clause, officially designating Sophie as property caretaker with provisional ownership rights. The legal maneuver would require court validation, but created immediate standing to challenge Reed's claims. I've watched what you've done here, restoring systems others declared hopeless, creating warmth where there was only ice. The house has chosen you as clearly as any legal document could. She placed the portfolio in Sophie's hands with ceremonial significance. What my family built deserves to live, not as some corporate playground, but as the sanctuary it was always meant to be. Reed's team escalated tactics in response to Eleanor's arrival. The water main tampering progressed to complete disconnection, county trucks arriving to physically sever the supply line under dubious work orders. Sophie had anticipated the move, her rainwater collection system already operational with storage capacity for several hundred gallons. The elaborate network of gutters, filters, and cisterns represented engineering improvisation at its finest, not elegant but thoroughly effective, transforming the mansion's extensive roof into catchment area capable of supporting their expanded household through normal precipitation patterns. The electrical isolation and water disconnection backfired spectacularly in the court of public opinion. Local news covered the utilities disruption, framing it as corporate bullying of an elderly woman in her family home. Photographs of Eleanor Hartford standing on her ancestral porch beside Sophie and Lily created powerful imagery that transcended legal technicalities. The story gained regional attention when environmental activists highlighted Reed's history of repurposing historic properties for industrial applications despite contrary public promises. What had begun as local property dispute evolved into a symbolic battle between corporate development and community heritage. Hank's contribution extended beyond practical assistance to community organization. His connections through the local VFW hall and postal routes yielded unexpected alliance. Retired tradespeople offering materials and expertise, farmers providing food when regular shopping became complicated by Sophie's recognizability, in-town church groups organizing support networks for the Hartford House Initiative. The coalition transcended typical political divisions, uniting individuals normally separated by partisan loyalty, but connected through appreciation for practical skill and resistance to outside influence in the local affairs. Most significantly, Sarah's story catalyzed broader support. Her experience with domestic abuse at the hands of a local deputy resonated with other women who had encountered similar institutional failures. The birth of her daughter named Hope, in acknowledgement of circumstances, transformed the mansion's symbolic significance from mere property dispute to sanctuary in the word's most fundamental meaning. 3 additional women with children sought temporary refuge within weeks, each fleeing untenable situations, each finding safety within stone walls that had stood against winter storms for over a century. The mansion's resurrection accelerated as volunteer assistance multiplied. Local electricians rewired critical sections to modern standards, bypassing the need for county inspection or approval. Plumbers restored internal systems while implementing Sophie's rainwater collection design with professional refinements. Carpenters addressed structural weaknesses, replacing rotted support beams and restoring collapsing ceilings. The great room, uninhabitable when Sophie arrived, became functional communal space, where displaced families gathered for meals prepared in the now modernized kitchen. The transformation from private residence to community resource happened organically, necessity driving evolution without formal planning. Reed's frustration manifested in increasingly desperate measures. His legal team filed multiple complaints, zoning violations, unauthorized occupancy, improper child care facility operation, each requiring response from Martha's expanding legal team, now supplemented by volunteer attorneys attracted to the developing narrative. Local officials found themselves caught between powerful development interests and groundswell community support, their enforcement actions increasingly hesitant and apologetic. The sheriff himself appeared one afternoon, ostensibly serving inspection papers but actually delivering unofficial warning about planned escalation from Reed's operatives. The discovery of Reed's actual development intentions shifted the conflict's foundation. Emma Shaw, a young reporter from the Silver Ridge Chronicle, who had been following the story, obtained internal planning documents through sources inside the county commissioner's office. The Heritage Resort proposal represented public relations facade rather than actual intention. The real development plans featured industrial waste processing facility utilizing the former mine shafts for deep storage of materials too hazardous for conventional disposal. The projected chemical composition and transportation requirements explained Reed's relentless pursuit. Few locations offered combination of existing underground infrastructure, political malleability, and geographic isolation. Sophie's discovery in the mansion's hidden room provided confirming context. Among classified documents, she found environmental impact studies conducted by her father showing the former silver mine's unique geological characteristics. The Department of Energy had considered the location for secure storage in the 1980s, but ultimately rejected it due to concerning fracture patterns in the surrounding bedrock and proximity to regional groundwater systems. The safety assessment concluded that while the mine appeared ideal for isolation purposes, actual containment reliability fell significantly below minimum standards for hazardous materials storage. Jack Bennett's signature appeared on the final recommendation against use, likely earning Reed's particular enmity once the connection to Sophie emerged. The revelation transformed public perception entirely. Environmental concerns transcended property rights disputes, mobilizing broader opposition, including regional conservation groups and state-level regulators suddenly attentive to previously overlooked permit applications. Reed's carefully constructed political support fractured as elected officials recalculated association costs. Senator Simmons executed particularly dramatic reversal announcing investigation into potentially misleading representations regarding development intentions, his righteous indignation proportional to his previous complicity. The crisis point arrived during late March's unexpected snowstorm. Reed, desperate as his project collapsed, deployed final attempt at forcing evacuation. Under cover of severe weather conditions, his operatives tampered with the mansion's newly restored electrical system, creating short circuit that disabled Sophie's careful safety measures. The resulting fire in the East Wing spread rapidly, threatening the entire structure during nighttime hours when most residents slept. The blaze might have succeeded where legal maneuvers failed, converting the mansion to insurance claim and construction opportunity had Sophie not established comprehensive emergency protocols. The response demonstrated everything the mansion had become. Sophie's military precision evacuation system functioned flawlessly, residents moving to predetermined safety areas, while Hank activated the volunteer fire brigade he'd organized among neighboring farms. Eleanor directed operations from the temporary command post in the gardener's cottage, her aristocratic bearing lending authority to coordination efforts. Local emergency services initially hesitant about jurisdiction, questions arrived to find civilian response already controlling the situation through barn-stored water pumps and improvised fire lines. The community that had gathered around the mansion's resurrection now fought physically to prevent its destruction. By dawn, the East Wing stood damaged, but the mansion itself remained intact, smoke-stained but structurally sound. More significantly, physical evidence remained of deliberate tampering, cut safety wires, disabled alarms, accelerant traces suggesting professional arson. The sheriff, finally forced to choose sides, definitively executed search warrants for redevelopment offices based on probable cause established at the fire scene. The resulting document seizure revealed communication explicitly discussing alternative methods for site clearing when legal channels proved ineffective. Reed's arrest for conspiracy and attempted arson marked effective conclusion to the property dispute. His company's stock plummeted as investigation expanded to previous development sites with suspicious structural failures. Senator Simmons announced retirement rather than face ethics investigation into his involvement. The Hartford Trust's ownership validation proceeded unopposed through Court Sophie's caretaker status, evolving toward permanent trustee designation with Eleanor's enthusiastic endorsement. The legal machinery that had once threatened displacement now moved equally inexorably toward protection. The mansion's transformation continued through spring thaw, its purpose evolving beyond initial survival, necessity toward deliberate community resource. The East Wing, rather than being merely repaired, underwent redesign as transitional housing for families escaping domestic violence with dedicated security systems and support infrastructure. The former ballroom became community meeting space, an educational center where Lily's online schooling expanded to include other children with interrupted educational access. The kitchen operated as training facility where culinary skills provided potential employment pathways for residents working toward independence. Most remarkably, the grounds experienced resurrection, matching the structure itself. Gardens long overgrown returned to productivity. Volunteers clearing decades of neglect to establish vegetable plots and native plant restoration areas. The greenhouse, its glass panels replaced through community effort, housed seedling operations, supplying both food production and ornamental landscaping. Hank supervised construction of playground equipment using salvaged materials, creating safe recreation space for children who had experienced primarily confinement and caution. Life reclaimed spaces long surrendered to emptiness and decay. Eleanor Hartford officially moved back into the mansion's refurbished master suite, coming full circle from the painful departure decades earlier. Her medical needs required modifications to the historic spaces, but Sophie's engineering creativity found solutions preserving architectural integrity while accommodating practical necessities. The family portraits returned to walls that had stood empty generations of Hartfords, witnessing the estate's evolution beyond anything they might have imagined when establishing the original trust provisions. The Hartford Warming House, as it became known locally, developed operational model balancing preservation needs against community service mission. A nonprofit foundation formalized the support network that had developed organically, providing legal structure for donations and volunteer coordination. Martha Jenkins emerged from semi-retirement to serve as foundation counsel, her legal expertise ensuring sustainable operation beyond the crisis that had initiated transformation. The Department of Energy, responding to revelations about the underground facility's historical purpose, provided remediation grant funding addressing long-neglected maintenance of the sealed mine shafts. Sophie found herself in roles she'd never anticipated, not merely mechanical systems technician, but community infrastructure engineer, designing physical and social systems with equal precision. The skills honed through military service and survival necessity translated to organizational development with surprising effectiveness. The mansion's systems became metaphor for community function. Separate components working interdependently, redundancy ensuring resilience, maintenance preventing catastrophic failure. The technical problem-solving approach that had initially restored heat and light expanded to address human systems with similar methodical care. Lily thrived amidst the expanding household, her initial trauma response to displacement transforming into remarkable adaptability and emotional intelligence beyond her years. She moved between residents with intuitive understanding of needs, sometimes sitting silently beside newly arrived children, too traumatized for conversation, other times organizing activities that gradually reintroduce play to lives defined by caution. Her school projects increasingly focused on architectural preservation and community development interests, emerging organically from lived experience rather than abstract study. The child who had arrived shivering in the back seat of a failing car now led tours explaining the mansion's historical significance to visiting student groups. On the anniversary of their arrival, the Hartford Warming House hosted formal celebration, not merely commemorating their survival, but recognizing the community that had developed through shared purpose. Families who had found temporary refuge returned to show their subsequent successes. Volunteers who had contributed specialized skills saw their contributions functioning as integrated whole. Eleanor presided with Sophie and Lily, flanking her on the mansion's front steps, 3 generations unrelated by blood, but connected through shared vision of what abandoned spaces could become when reclaimed through determined effort. The celebration included dedication of Memorial Garden, honoring Jack Bennett's role in the mansion's story. Sophie installed the bronze plaque, personally finally understanding her father's cryptic postcard message about the last peaceful place. He had recognized something in the Hartford property beyond its physical structure or historical significance. Potential sanctuary when systems elsewhere failed, stone walls that could shelter not just against weather, but against human storms of greed and power. The breadcrumbs he'd left had guided her when conventional resources failed, connecting present necessity to historical purpose through hidden pathways he'd anticipated decades earlier. As twilight settled over the gathering, Hank raised his glass in simple toasts that captured their improbable journey, from frozen to flame, from empty to full, from forgotten to remembered. The Hartford house stands not because stone lasts forever, but because purpose outlives abandonment. The assembled community responded with murmured agreement, their collective presence validation of effort that had initially seemed futile. The mansion stood illuminated against darkening sky windows, glowing with warmth that pushed back against natural entropy, against corporate acquisition, against the assumption that forgotten places must remain forgotten. Later, after celebrations concluded and residents settled into evening routines, Sophie stood alone on the widow's walk overlooking the property. Spring had fully established dominance over winter's retreat, new growth emerging from ground long dormant. The contrast between the mansion's condition upon their arrival and its current state seemed almost incomprehensible, not merely physical restoration, but fundamental resurrection of purpose. The transformation represented something beyond property reclamation or historic preservation. It demonstrated possibility itself that abandonment need not be permanent, that systems declared hopeless could function again with proper care and commitment. Sophie traced her fingers along stone balustrade, worn smooth by generations of Hartford hands, now joined by new lineages establishing different connections to the structure. The mansion breathed around her systems she'd restored, working in harmonious coordination, neither frozen nor forgotten, but fully alive with purpose. What had begun as desperate shelter had evolved into deliberate sanctuary, not through dramatic revolution, but through persistent restoration of function, through recognition of what remained sound beneath superficial damage, through refusal to accept abandonment as final condition. Some things once broken become stronger. At the mended places, this truth applied equally to buildings, communities, and the people who created both.